Welcome back. Well, we just showed you the highlights. Now to break down the Week 9 action from the NSIC, we bring in our Northern Sun expert, David Brown. David, how's it going?
Good.
Well, good. We're here to talk some football, and I say this every week, but I feel like the games I thought were going to be close were blowouts. The games I thought would be blowouts were close. So
Topsy-turvy all around the league.
Topsy-turvy. Our pets' heads are falling off. But with that, what was the most impressive win of Week 9?
Well, for the third week in a row, it's Minnesota State. 2 weeks ago, I said it was a 45-point win on the road at Upper Iowa. 2 weeks ago, I said it was a 47-point win on the road against Southwest Minnesota State. And now this past week, the big win in the Battle of the Unbeatens over Winona State, 27-6. The offense was missing Nate Gunn, leading rusher in the conference with a sprained knee, but that didn't matter. Justin Taormina picked up the slack, 95 yards and a touchdown. And the defense, having held its previous two opponents to 7 points each, held Winona State to just 6 on 2 field goals. If you look at the offensive numbers, this game was actually pretty even, but the difference is what every coach looks at on defense. Third down percentage and turnovers. Winona State just 2 of 14 on third down, and the Mavericks forced 5 Warrior turnovers, including a fumble return for touchdown by Defensive Player of the Week Evan Parizeau, which you just saw. Now, this obviously helps Minnesota State in the regional rankings as well as the D2 Coaches Poll. They're the new #1 team in all of Division II in the Coaches Poll. Now, as far as Super Region 4 in determining the playoffs, they have some tricky calculations. They put strength of schedule into consideration. So the Mavericks are actually #2 in the Super Region 4 polls. NSIC teams are kind of hurt intrinsically because the strength of schedule is hurt because they only play other teams within the NSIC. So that's why the Mavs are #2 in the Super Region 4 poll. But regardless, they're a team that is poised for a deep playoff run. This is the team that everyone should look out for.
Well, that was one of the games that I thought would be close, and it was kind of a blowout. So, I mean, kudos to the Mavericks. But with that, if we're looking for an MVP of Week 9, who would that be?
Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit and say the MVP goes to the entire Minnesota Duluth defense. I mean, a third straight shutout, 17-0 over Bemidji State on Thursday Night Football. Now, granted, the conditions were less than ideal, but they held Bemidji State to 50 yards in this game. Not on one drive, not in one quarter, 50 yards for the entire game. Again, conditions, as you can clearly see, less than ideal, but both sides had to play the game, and Minnesota Duluth simply adapted better. They got an early lead, and it seemed like the defensive players on the Bulldogs sort of relished the fact they got to play in the snow and the cold and everything like that, while Bemidji State just seemed like they'd rather be anywhere else. And what this does now for UMD is this gives them an opportunity to sneak into the playoff picture. They were #10 in the region last week, #9 this week. Only the top 7 get in, but this win over Bemidji State was their most impressive of the season. What's going to hurt the Bulldogs down the stretch, as I mentioned earlier with Minnesota State, the strength of schedule. They play Minnesota Crookston and U-Mary in the past next 2 weeks. They're the 2 worst teams in the NSIC record-wise. In theory, Minnesota Duluth should beat both of those teams to finish 9-2, but then the question is going to come down to, were those wins good enough to propel them over some other teams? They're going to need some help, but either way, even if they don't get into the playoffs, they're in firm position for the Mineral Water Bowl, which again is another game and can give the Bulldogs some momentum heading into 2018.
Very true. That defense was absolutely nasty, but
Third
nastier.
straight shutout. First time that's happened since the 30s for UMD.
That's huge, and they had some great defense back when they won the national championship.
Under USD coach Bob Nielsen back in 08 and 10.
That's right. Well, those conditions were awful. I was cold just watching it on TV.
And I was there.
And you were there in a warm press box.
That I was.
All right, well, moving on. We're getting down to the final 2 weeks of regular season play. Looking at Saturday, what's the matchup you're looking forward to most?
Well, the most critical matchup of Week 10 is going to be Sioux Falls at Upper Iowa. USF is 8-1, Upper Iowa is 6-3. And this is a game the Cougars honestly can't afford to overlook. Their playoff life is on the line. They beat Augustana 21-14 in the Key to the City game on Saturday, but honestly, it was far from their best effort. Receivers were dropping passes. Ian Feber wasn't exactly accurate, but the defense and the always solid running game propelled them. Jason Towns had another big day on the ground in the absence of Max Mickey, and he's going to be critical against the Peacocks. USF expects Max Mickey to be back for the final week of the regular season against Minnesota State, but they need to get by Upper Iowa first. And for the Peacocks, they're back on the winning track. They're guaranteed to finish above 500 this season after a 3-8 mark last year. The issue for Upper Iowa is their 3 losses have all come to ranked teams: Minnesota Duluth, Winona State, and Minnesota State. And honestly, none of those 3 losses were particularly close. And USF obviously is a ranked team. So can Upper Iowa prove it's not just beating up on the weaklings of the NSIC and raise their level against the Cougars? And for USF, can they not overlook this game? And looking at that Minnesota State game to end the regular season, can they take care of business against Upper Iowa and not have to rely on performing against the #1 team in the country to fight for a playoff spot.
Yeah, and Upper Iowa's quarterback play right now, very good. Ryan Parmalee, Offensive Player of the Week in the Northern Sun.
Absolutely. They got a solid running game. Upper Iowa's no joke.
All right. Well, we've talked about the playoffs and the rankings, so let's take a look at the region, or the Super Region 4 rankings. We've talked about them a ton, but Minnesota State's number 2, Winona State number 4, Sioux Falls number 5, Duluth at number 9. The top 7 teams make it into the D2 playoffs, but how many NSIC teams do you think will get in?
Well, I honestly think there's going to be 3, and the question is going to be whether that final playoff spot is going to be Sioux Falls or Minnesota Duluth. I think Minnesota State, barring the unforeseen, even if they lose their final 2 games of the regular season, they should get in just based on their previous precedent and good wins over Winona State last week. Winona State, in my opinion, can only afford to lose 1 more game. They're at SMSU this week, then they're at home against Augustana for our final Thursday night football game of the year on Midco SN. They should be okay with that win already against Sioux Falls, but 2 wins would lock up a spot for the Warriors. And as I mentioned, the big question is going to be USF versus Minnesota Duluth. For the Cougars, they have to beat Upper Iowa, as I mentioned, because that Minnesota State game in the last week of the regular season, you don't want to have to rely on a big performance in that game against the #1 team in the country. And for UMD, I already said I think they probably will get to 9-2 with wins over Crookston and UMary to end the season. Then they're going to need some help either for Sioux Falls to drop lower or for some of the other non-NSIC teams to falter. But UMD can help themselves, Kelly, in a couple of ways. 1, obviously win both of their remaining games, and 2, do so in style. They won't benefit from the strength of schedule, but if they score a lot of points, maybe shut out both UMary and Crookston to end the season with 5 straight shutouts, that could help Minnesota Duluth's case in the eyes of the selection committee. But it's going to be a very interesting final 2 weeks between Minnesota Duluth and Sioux Falls to see who will battle it out for that final playoff spot. I think one of them will get it along with Minnesota State and Winona State. So the NSIC, in my opinion, should get 3 teams in.
It's crunch time. That time of the year. All right, thank you so much, David.
Thank you.
Well, when we come back, we go down to Vermillion, where it's time for Coach Talk with USC's Bob Nielsen, the Coyote football team bouncing back from a Week 7 loss with a shutout of Southern Illinois. Stay right here.